Today I'm going to take you out to a place that's kind of near and dear to myself. As a kid, I grew up with a passion for history, and the primary reason for that passion for history was the location I'm at right now, the Battle of Cowpens. Cowpens battlefield was only 20 or 30 minutes away from where I lived as a child. And we didn't have a whole lot to do back in those days, video games or anything like that. Our family was dirt poor. So we spent a lot of our free time here at this battlefield, daydreaming and learning about the heroes at the Battle of Cowpens. Off in the distance behind me here is the visitor center to the Cowpens National Battlefield. And when I was a kid coming out to this battlefield, that was the present time. I would hit this trail, and as I was walking down this trail, you can see how the trees are starting to surround me. And I'm a little guy out here walking around, and this was my time travel machine, because once I was surrounded by these woods, I would start to imagine the soldiers that were out here for the American colonies getting prepared to go into battle against Bannister Tarleton. And the further I got into these woods, the more and more the present time disappeared. And to a young man, it felt like you were traveling through time. So that was a neat thing I wanted to share with people. This is what national battlefields and places like this can do for kids with imaginations, especially if you have nothing else to do. But now that I'm here as a much older person, it's a time traveling machine again, except this time I'm traveling through my own history. Now, on January 17, 1781, a small battle would take place. In comparison to American Civil War battles, it would be a very small battle. But this battle would be so consequential that it would turn the tide of the American Revolutionary War in the South. And it would turn the focus of the generals for the Royal Army to more northern areas. Cornwallis himself would seek out to find Greene at Guilford Courthouse. Bannister Tarleton would turn north, and everything would be led to Yorktown, where eventually Cornwallis would surrender his army. Welcome to the Cowpens battle. Out here on this field, General Morgan secured a great victory for the American colonies. He would later report after the battle, "Our loss was inconsiderable, not having more than 12 killed and 60 wounded. The enemy's loss was 10 commissioned officers and over 100 rank and file killed and 200 wounded, 29 commissioned officers and about 500 privates, prisoners which fell into our hands, with 2 pieces of artillery, 2 standards, 800 muskets, 1 traveling forge, 35 baggage wagons, and upwards of 100 dragoon horses with all their muskets. And one of the first things that you see when you walk into this battlefield is the Washington Light Infantry Monument. And erected here in 1856, it is literally one of the oldest monuments in the area erected that stands as a testament to the patriotism of the soldiers that fought not only Cowpens but throughout the American Revolution. And it's this monument right here behind me. Now, when we get into the talk about the Battle of Cowpens, it's more than just a talk about two forces fighting each other. It's kind of a symbolic battle in between the two types of people that we're talking about. On one side you have Daniel Morgan, and on the other side you have Banastre Tarleton. Now, Banastre Tarleton received a pretty bad rap in the colonies for the way his soldiers behaved and how he held no quarter and waged total war on the colonies. His battle wasn't just on the battlefield, it was at the home front too. And at the Waxhaws, the Patriots put their arms up and tried to surrender, and they were butchered on the field as a result of them trying to surrender. So Tarleton's quarter was a common phrase used after that battle for not showing any quarter to soldiers on the field. In other words, butchering soldiers that were surrendering. Tarleton himself would be called the butcher because of the way he burned crops, he burned houses, he terrorized civilians locally, and he also killed soldiers that were surrendering. So for that reason, he would have a very bad reputation here in the colonies. And for that reputation, he would become way more famous here than he ever would be in his homeland in England, over in Liverpool. Hannibal created a tactic called double envelopment, and this happened against a superior Roman force in 216. And he enveloped a huge force and crushed that superior force on the field of battle. Well, now here at the Battle of Cowpens, something similar happened, but it happened almost by accident because there were some confused orders out here that led to the British regulars charging into a situation that they didn't realize they were getting into. So on this location here, after firing twice, the militia retreated behind the Continentals who were awaiting the British advance. At this location, this is where Lieutenant Colonel Howard's order was misunderstood. The 71st Highlanders were coming over here towards their right flank, and he had ordered them to turn and face the enemy. But when he did that, the center and left of his Continentals misunderstood that and thought that they were doing an orderly retreat. So they went to fall back. This is when this positioning basically became a strength for Daniel Morgan. He realized what was happening, and Morgan ordered the Continentals to face about and fire at close range. The raw recruits of the British 7th Regiment panicked and fell back, and the Highlanders, still coming on like a mob, were repulsed. The stage was set for an entrapment and annihilation of the army out here, of the British regulars and loyalists. this area here, all out into the front, all around this direction here. This is the flanking area. This is that right location. And it's just past the curvature of the land. So when Morgan set his men up, he'd set them up in 3 lines like we were talking about. This is the concealment location of those Continental regulars. Daniel Morgan, born in 1731 to Welsh parents, was said to have not talked a whole lot when he was a kid. And his parents weren't exactly the nicest parents in the world. He was, I guess, living in a pretty bad situation by all accounts. Because at the age of 17, he gets into an argument with his father, and in the middle of the night, he leaves home. He doesn't let him know where he's going. He makes his way to Virginia. In Virginia, he becomes a tradesman of sort. He works as a laborer, then as a superintendent in a sawmill, and then eventually he works in the field of work that gets him his nickname, the old wagoneer. And he becomes a wagoneer. When the French and Indian War breaks out, he becomes a wagoneer for the British Army. But in that army, he starts to show his defiant and rebellious side. He angers a lieutenant of that army, who then hits him with the broadside of his sword. Because he got hit by that sword, he did what most men would probably do, and he knocked him out. One punch, put him on the ground. Well, being in the army of that day, you don't do that to an officer. So they court-martialed him, and they ordered him to have 500 lashes. The drummer counted out the lashes, and Dan Morgan took his lashes like a man. But at the end of it, he swore up and down that the drummer miscounted, and he told the story for the rest of his life, how the British Army still owed him 1 lash. So that rebellious nature was always there in spirit. Dan Morgan would make a name for himself here before the American Revolution. In 1757, Daniel Morgan gets his commission in the British Army as an ensign. And as he is doing his duties as an ensign, he's on a run with two men and is going through Indian territory. He's ambushed. He's shot through the back of the neck, and the bullet comes out his face and knocks a couple of teeth out of his mouth and leaves a massive scar on his face. Now, in one of the more popular paintings that we have of him that we know of, you can see that scar on his face that he carries for the rest of his life. So this road behind me here traditionally was called the Green River Road. And it's the road that went straight through the Cowpens. It was one of the main thoroughfares out here that these armies used to get into position. Directly behind me, in that position right back there, it is said that Washington and his men came around on their horses to meet the dragoons and the officers that were left back here closer to the end of the battle. And when they rode into position to get into those saber fights, Washington nearly lost his life. He was in a bad position. And according to legend, his servant saved his life by shooting someone point blank as he rode up on his horse. No one knows for sure if that is a true story, but the legend still exists out here at the Cowpens. And it's actually on the sign that's back there and in paintings about the Battle of Cowpens when it shows green dragoons with their sabers raised fighting Continental soldiers on horseback. So now let's progress a little bit through Dan Morgan's career here in the Continentals. In 1775, he's captured as a POW with Benedict Arnold. In 1777, he distinguishes himself at Saratoga. In 1779, he's then passed over for Brigadier General. This is the moment when Dan Morgan lets his ego get the best of him. Because he's passed over, he decides he's just going to quit. Again, he feels like he deserves it. And like many people who are in the services, they have a point in time when they feel like they should have been promoted, but they're passed over. But in today's service, for the most part, if you're passed over for promotion, you're under contract. There's no quitting. Dan Morgan quits. He sits on his hands back at the house while everyone else is fighting. Eventually, Congress offers him control of the entire Southern forces, the whole theater. It's tempting. Dan Morgan asks, is there a promotion involved? Congress says no, there's not. He then refuses again. But eventually, Gates has a disaster. And because of the disaster, it prompts Morgan to come out of his retirement. And he lets his ego go. And he finally rejoins the forces. And just in time, too. And by October of 1780, Daniel Morgan is promoted to Brigadier General. A couple months later, he would have the most consequential moment of his career, right here at the Battle of Cowpens. Now Dan Morgan's going out to these campfires of all of his soldiers. He knows they're nervous. and he knows that they're unsure what's going to happen the next day. And he's telling them exactly what his plan is. He's trying to give them confidence. And he's actually packed them in between two rivers just in case their confidence fails, because he knows he has to make a stand out here at the Cowpens. As far as tactics are concerned, Morgan's plan is simply this. He's got militia that he knows will run. So he's going to set them up in two lines in front. And he's going to tell them to fire 2 volleys and then retreat past the next series of lines. The second line is going to do the same thing and then retreat to the third line. The third line is going to be his regulars, the Continentals. They're real soldiers. They're not militia. And they will stick and fight. He knows this. So that plan is divvied out. Now also in a swell, he's going to tuck away Washington and the cavalrymen that are underneath Washington. And this is also planned so that they're not seen. Another feature of this Cowpens out here is it's got rolling hills. His Continentals are going to be tucked away behind another hill that's just ahead of me here. Those Continentals are going to be hidden from sight. And the purpose is, if everything goes right, the militia scurry off from here. The British think that they're retreating, and they get right on top of the Continentals without realizing what's happening until it's too late. And then the Continentals unleash a volley that's supposed to knock them to their knees. Now, if you know anything about those smoothbore muskets of the day, the flintlock rifle, first, they're fired by a pan that has powder in it. The flint creates a spark. That spark usually has a small delay that's felt by the person firing it, and then the gun blasts off with a small high power, high caliber bullet. The bullet itself isn't shaped like a typical bullet of the day. It's a musket ball. It's round. And when it comes out of that barrel, it's not coming out of a rifle, it's coming out of a smoothbore barrel, which means it's firing out of there kind of like a cannonball. It's wobbling around in all kinds of different directions. And if you're about 150 yards off, you might be able to hit something roughly the size of a large barn, if you're lucky, and not even aim at something specific on that barn. Is going to hit something within the general region of that large barn. So realistically, they need those soldiers to be right on top of them for their line to be effective. And that's also why Napoleonic warfare is the way it is. They have to mass their men together shoulder to shoulder in order to be more effective. So now it's time for everybody's favorite time, battlefield orientation. I am going to describe it first, and then I'll put the map up on the screen so you can see what we're talking about, and then I'll pull the map back off again. Now off in the distance down here is Green River Road, and if you look at where the trees connect way down there in the distance, Bannister Tarleton's men are lining up in that low depression that drops down through here. This is where the swampy area is. Behind his men are the men on horseback, the dragoons. And off behind that, way down that road, is a house called the Scruggs House. It's a settler's house that's out here, and we'll take you over there here in a minute so you can see what that looks like. At the positioning that I'm at right now, which is kind of a high point, this is where the sharpshooters would have been in that first initial wave of assaults from the colonial army. Their orders are simply to drop to a knee, wait for the British regulars to come into view, and to take aim, fire, and then fall back behind that militia line. Now, we'll pull that map down and we'll point, or we'll put the map up so you can see what we were talking about. Now, take a look at that map, and we are going to point to the area there. You see where it says "you are here." That's exactly where I'm standing. Out in front there, you can see the redcoats with horses anchored on either end. And then behind that, you can see more soldiers. And then behind that, you can see more red horses. You can also see those green pieces of artillery, which are colored red on this map because they're British. And you see that green road that runs through with the dotted line. That's the Green River Road. The dotted line is where you come onto the trail, onto the Green River Road. And then where we're standing, you can see where the sharpshooters are just directly in front of us on this ridge line here. Now we'll take the map back down off the screen. So that's the ridge line I'm talking about. This is the Green River Road. The dotted line starts way over there where everything dips down and then comes up in this direction. British regulars are out there towards those trees, and the first line of defense is here. Now I'm going to put the map back up on the screen. And if you take a look at that map, directly behind where it says "you are here," there is the skirmish line. Those are the soldiers that are the militia. They're the ones that are going to fall back after 2 volleys behind the regular Continentals. And then there's another line of Continentals. And then behind that, you can see men on horseback, which are hidden in a swell. Now, I'm going to take that map off the screen here in just a second so that you can see what we're talking about here. Now, directly behind me is that skirmish line that we were talking about. Beyond that, there's the main line of Continentals, and then off in the swell over in this direction is where Washington's cavalry is going to be tucked away, kind of behind but off a little bit over there. And then facing back in this direction again, here we are. That's that ridge line where the sharpshooters are. Now, Tarleton's men are coming down that road directly behind me. They're barreling their way down through here at dawn. He's put his men in line to fight. He hasn't even fully deployed his core unit the way he's supposed to, and he's already thrown them in the fight. So there's mistake number 1. Number 2, he doesn't have his full dragoon unit up and ready. Mistake number 2. Mistake number 3, he's young and eager. He's ready for the fight, and he's barreling forward because he thinks that these Continentals are going to run the moment that they're pressed by a professional army. What he wasn't expecting was a whole old hard scrabble man with a really good plan set up and ready here at Cowpens to fight him to the end. So who's facing us over here? Who are these British soldiers? Well, in order to focus on that, we need to focus on who the leader is. Bannister Tarleton is a 26-year-old man. He's very green when it comes to fighting, and he's bought himself a commission in order to come over to the Americas. In those days, you could do that. How did he afford this commission? Well, let's look at his family's life. His father was a mayor. He himself went to Oxford. He comes from money. He's had a very fancy life, all of his life. And in the military, he kind of earns his way as an officer. He earns his reputation as an officer, but let's just say he doesn't earn his way in life prior to that. He's kind of had everything handed to him, really. He comes over here and he learns some very hard lessons. And by the time this war is over with, when the British Army is defeated, as was tradition, the American officers invite the British officers out to a dinner to sit down together and talk. And when they do, they don't send an invitation to Tarleton. He's the only officer not invited. And he reports back asking if that was by mistake. And the British officers and the American officers tell him that is not a mistake and is for the atrocities that you committed during this war. So neither side really likes what he did. So now I'm back here on the main line where the Continental soldiers would have been. And directly behind me there, that's that flank we were talking about, way off in the distance. This is where the 71st Highlanders come into press. And this is also where Howard's orders are confused, and that flank is turned. In the position that I'm at right now, the Continentals decide that they're going to retreat. They think the order is to retreat. Dan Morgan sees that, and he realizes he has an opportunity to reposition the men, turn them, and fire onto the British soldiers point blank. So that's what he does. He maneuvers them around, turns them, fires on the British soldiers, and then the double envelopment happens at that point. They've rushed in so far and separated themselves from their general officers, their leaders, that they have to give up. And so the casualty rate out here, by comparison to each other, it's pretty astronomical. So what size forces are we looking at out here? Well, based on the statistics that are on the American Battlefield Trust website, which are very reliable, the Brits had 1,150 soldiers out here, and the colonists had about 1,065 soldiers out here. At the end of the battle, the casualty rate was USA 149, and the Royal Army 868 soldiers. We're looking at the majority of those casualties for the British side to be taken prisoner of war. The amount of deaths that happened during a siege or a fight during the American Revolution wasn't nearly as bad as a Civil War battle. So when you come to these places, it is hallowed ground, is how our country started, is to be respected. But also, just remember, don't expect the visual of thousands of soldiers being dead on the field, because that's just not something that happened here or any American Revolutionary War battlefield. Morgan, up to this point, has had a pretty hard life, pretty rough life. And so he has many different illnesses that kind of dictate what he does. And after the Battle of Cowpens, he has a sciatica that's so bad that he ends up no longer being able to get into the saddle. And so he effectively retires after the Battle of Cowpens, kind of like a Super Bowl champ winning the Super Bowl and leaving. He's done. In 1790, Congress strikes a gold medal in honor of his victory here at the Cowpens and awards him with that gold medal. I remember in those days, they're really not handing out medals or medals of honor or things like that. The Medal of Honor doesn't come around until the American Civil War. Dan Morgan would then go on in 1797 to be elected one term to the House of Representatives. And then in July 6th of 1802, he ends up dying. But he has a storied career and an amazing victory here at Cowpens for a far superior army, really. As a kid coming out to this field, I used to pass by that monument right there all the time, and I would think about the patriots that were out here fighting, and about the monument being erected in 1856. I had a chance encounter, though, out here on this field, passing by one of the park rangers within the network of ranger series out here, with the Over Mountain Men, Victory Trail, and Kings Mountain, and he helps out with the different areas. Mr. Caldwell. Now he tells me that monument back during the Civil War, soldiers on Stoneman's raid actually came out here and passed by that monument, and they actually stopped to read the inscriptions on the monument. They took the time to read the history that took place here at Cowpens. This is near the end of that war. It's pretty amazing and powerful stuff, standing out here at these battlefields and thinking about a moment in time like that, where two major parts of our American history came together. When you had soldiers from the American Civil War who were fighting to keep the United States intact, passing by here, standing on a field of battle that men had fought to keep something going, to turn this thing into a country that would eventually become the United States. So many times I passed by that monument and didn't even know that happened. I'd say this trip was well worth it. Now, sometime between 2012 and 2015, I was told that there was an archaeological dig that was done out here. So in other words, metal detectors came out here and looked for signs of battle. And they found plenty of ammunition that was dropped on the ground out here in the lines behind me, indicating where the lines of battle were. But just over the ridge here at Cowpens, closer to the visitor center, there was another line of musket balls that were dropped on the ground as if it were in a line of battle. Some historians are thinking now, rethinking the battle lines out here and thinking that Dan Morgan might have actually had his men fall back to this position here for that final attack that would create that double envelopment. Bannister Tarleton never really becomes this Napoleonic figure over in the United Kingdom. His history really is a footnote over there, and he's not nearly as popular over there as he is in the United States. Here in this area, and I can tell you from personal experience, being a kid that grew up in the area, he was seen as the devil. Many of us looked at him like he was the most evil thing on earth, and many tales were told about how Bannister Tarleton would come and get you in the night in your sleep. Silly tales like that. But realistically, Bannister Tarleton was an officer on these fields. He wasn't the devil. He was trying to win battles, and his tactics just were not accepted at that time. He's kind of the Sherman of the British Army, if you think of it. Sherman did the same thing, complete and total warfare. Sherman didn't come from another country to burn houses and crops. He was from the United States, burning houses and crops of people from the United States. He created total warfare too. But Tarleton would go back to England. He would receive a hero's welcome. He would be commissioned to become a general. Eventually, as a young man, he would start graying out pretty early in his life. At the age of 43, I think it was, said that his hair pretty much turned to gray. He ended up having a 15-year on-again, off-again relationship with an author, which wasn't seen as being very popular because it wasn't a wedding or a marriage. He gets elected to a position in Parliament. He's actually knighted, so it's Sir Tarleton to you. And then he goes on to marry his wife, and he dies an old man at the age of 79, I think. So he had a pretty storied life, and he started very young. And regardless of the fact that when he started out, his life was pretty much handed to him on a silver spoon, he did make a life for himself as a grown man. He did very well of it. Now, near the end of the battle, two officers out here, Anderson and Kirkwood, one from Maryland, one from Delaware, they see two grasshoppers, which is a type of ordnance that's out here, and they realize that they can capture this ordnance and turn it on their enemy. They come vaulting forward at a full speed to try to get to these pieces of ordnance. Using a spontoon, one of the officers vaults himself up and over top of the enemy and jumps on top of this piece of ordnance and turns it. And then another officer runs forward and grabs the other piece of ordnance and rotates it. This is roughly the location of where that ordnance was positioned here during the Battle of Cowpens. It's pretty neat to stand in a moment in time like that. So today I end the story here at the Battle of Cowpens, at the place where I would traditionally end my trip as a kid. We would come right over here to the Robert Scruggs house, hop on the back porch, take a seat, and our parents would take a picture of us with one of those old disposable cameras, and they never quite came out right. The picture would either be half on one sheet, half on the other, and then after 2 or 3 tries, you'd get one good picture out of the entire bunch. You'd take it and turn it into the Kodak Center and have them develop those photos for you. Today, I'm going to take the family out here and snap the photograph on the back of this porch with an iPhone, and I'll instantly have a good picture. The Battle of Cowpens raged on out here for a little over an hour, and the estimates of the losses between the two forces really are not that big a deal. Now, for a kid growing up out here, learning about this battle, it was like it was Gettysburg to me. It was huge. But it's not the amount of losses or the type of fight that took place out here that was big. It's the impact that this battle had on the American Revolution. This small battle, this 1-hour conflict that took a huge force off the field and turned the tide in the South, really helped to unfold what was going to happen in Yorktown. And even though Guilford Courthouse didn't turn out the way that the Patriots had hoped it would, Cornwallis worked himself into a trap. And those British forces would end up having to surrender themselves there in Yorktown. But it starts with a small battle like Cowpens. These victories here in the South, they really helped to unravel those royal forces. It's been fun taking you out here to Cowpens, one of my all-time favorite places. I hope you enjoyed the video. Till next time, Sisters Waffles.